I cannot stand all the time, and in this country no one's head shall be higher than kings.
Yul Brynner was more than just a Hollywood star. He was a legend surrounded by mystery. For years, questions about his past and the truth behind his larger-than-life persona kept fans guessing. But only recently did his daughter step forward and confirm what so many had quietly suspected all along. Join us as we uncover the shocking truths behind Yul Brynner's life. Struggles across the globe. Yul Brynner's story began far from the glamour of Hollywood. He was born on July 11, 1920 in Vladivostok, a port city on Russia's Pacific coast. This location was about as far as one could be from the grand stages and film sets where he would one day make his mark. His birth name was Yul Brynner, a name that carried with it both pride and pain. His father, Boris, worked as a mining engineer. He came from a Russian background, but his presence in Yul's life was brief. Boris abandoned the family when Yul was still very young, leaving behind a deep sense of loss that shaped much of Yul's early years. The strongest figure in Yul's life during these early days was his mother, Marusia. She came from a Swiss-German family and possessed an unwavering determination to protect her son and give him opportunities despite the odds stacked against them. With her, Yul inherited not only European roots but also resilience and strength of character. On his father's side, he had Mongolian and Buryat heritage, which added to the uniqueness of his identity. His striking appearance later in life, a face and presence that audiences found unforgettable, was shaped by this rich blend of cultures. Yul's birthplace of Vladivostok was rugged and remote. Life there was often harsh, and after his father's departure, the future looked uncertain. His mother decided to take drastic steps to secure a better path for him. She uprooted the family and moved them to Beijing, a city already brimming with international communities at the time. Beijing became Yul's new home during his most formative years. While it gave him a chance to see a much larger world than the one in Vladivostok, it also carried its own struggles. The absence of his father left a mark on him that never truly faded. According to his daughter Victoria, Yul carried a bitterness toward Boris throughout his life. The sense of abandonment fueled both his ambition and his complicated personality. Yet life in Beijing also opened doors for Yul in unexpected ways. The city was a meeting point of different cultures, and as a boy he was exposed to languages, customs, and traditions that few children of his time could experience. He heard Russian at home, but he also picked up other languages from the diverse community around him. This early exposure to multilingual environments planted the seeds of a skill that would later define him. Yul grew up to become fluent in English, French, Japanese, and Hungarian, along with a working knowledge of Russian. His ability to move easily between languages gave him a flexibility on stage and screen that most actors never had. His years in China also helped him develop a sense of identity that was not tied to just one culture or country. He was at once Russian, Swiss-German, and Mongolian, yet he was also shaped by his time living among foreigners and Chinese families in Beijing. This mix made him a man of the world before he ever set foot on the international stage. These early years, marked by hardship, abandonment, and cultural richness, were the foundation on which Yul Brynner built his remarkable life. And this was only the beginning. His move to Paris would set him on a path towards survival, discovery, and the first steps towards stardom. When Yul Brynner's mother decided to leave China and move to Paris, it was not an easy choice. She was raising her children alone after being abandoned by her husband, and she knew that the future in Beijing would be uncertain. Paris, in her eyes, offered a chance at a new life, even though it meant starting from scratch in a foreign country. With determination and courage, she brought Yul to France, hoping the city would give him better opportunities. Life in Paris, however, was nothing like the romantic images people often imagine. For Yul and his mother, it was a daily struggle to survive. They had little money and lived with constant financial hardship. His mother had to make tough sacrifices to keep the family afloat, and Yul quickly learned that if he wanted to get by, he would need to work and contribute as well. Poverty shaped his teenage years, but it also gave him discipline and resilience. By the time he was 16, Yul had left school. The classroom could no longer offer him what he needed most: income. Instead, he turned to whatever work he could find. His first real path was through music. With his natural sense of rhythm and stage presence, he joined a traveling gypsy troupe as a guitarist. The group moved from place to place, and Yul performed for audiences that were often small but lively. It was during this period that he discovered the power of connecting with people through performance, even if it was only through music at the time. But Yul did not stop with music. His adventurous spirit pushed him into an entirely different world, that of the circus. He joined the Cirque d'Hiver, one of the well-known circuses in Paris, where he worked as an acrobat and trapeze artist. The circus was demanding and dangerous, requiring not only physical strength, but also courage. Yul threw himself into this life with determination, eager to prove himself and carve out a place in the world. This bold leap, however, almost cost him everything. In 1937, disaster struck. While performing on the parallel bars, Yul suffered a devastating fall. The accident left him with 49 fractures across his body. The injuries were so severe that his career as an acrobat ended instantly. What had once been a source of energy and pride became the moment that forced him to stop and rethink his future. The long recovery period was painful, both physically and emotionally, yet it also became a turning point in his life. Unable to return to the circus, Yul began to search for another path. It was during this time that his focus shifted toward the stage and acting. The discipline he had learned in music and the presence he had developed as a circus performer stayed with him, but now they were directed towards something new. Yul Brynner's time in Paris was filled with hardship, danger, and struggle, but it gave him the toughness and creativity that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. And from there, his move to America would open up a whole new chapter full of ambition and unexpected chances. Finding the path to Hollywood. After recovering from his accident at the circus, Yul Brynner needed to reinvent himself. Paris, with its vibrant cultural life, gave him the opportunity to do just that. During the late 1930s, theater and the arts were flourishing in France. Yul began to spend more and more time around actors, stage directors, and musicians. It was in this environment that he first discovered acting as more than just entertainment. The theater offered him a new kind of expression, one that allowed him to channel his energy, his emotions, and his striking presence in a way that music and acrobatics never had. He began training and slowly gained roles in small productions across France. At first, they were not glamorous or well-paid, but they gave him a place to develop discipline and confidence. Yul's unusual appearance, a mix of Russian, Mongolian, and European features, set him apart on stage. He was not the typical French actor, and audiences noticed. With each performance, he became more certain that acting was his true calling. His reputation grew, though modestly, and by the time the Second World War was spreading across Europe, Yul had already set his sights on something greater. In 1941, at just 21 years old, Yul made a bold decision that would change his life. He left France and moved to the United States. New York City was the heart of theater and the growing film industry, and he wanted to be part of it. The move was risky. He had no guarantee of success, little money, and no connections that could immediately secure him a place in the spotlight. But Yul carried with him a drive that pushed him to take whatever opportunities came his way. In New York, survival once again depended on odd jobs. Yul worked as a bus driver for an actors company, ensuring performers got where they needed to go. He also found work as a French-speaking radio announcer for the U.S. Office of War Information during World War II. This job made use of his language skills and gave him a chance to speak with clarity and authority, skills that would later serve him well on stage. At the same time, he began auditioning for roles in Broadway productions. The parts were small at first, but every role was a step forward. Slowly, he began to stand out. What audiences and directors noticed about him was not just his talent, but also his presence. His sharp features, piercing eyes, and the way he carried himself gave him a natural charisma that people remembered. Even in minor roles, Yul looked like he belonged in the spotlight. Though he was still unknown in the larger world of American theater, the seeds of his future fame were already planted. He had proven that he could adapt, survive, and make his way in entirely new environments. What he needed now was the right role, something that would let him show his full power as a performer. And soon that role would come, in the form of a king who would make him unforgettable: the birth of the iconic bald king. In 1951, Yul Brynner's career took the turn that would define his entire life. After years of struggling to find steady acting work in New York, he was cast in a new Rodgers and Hammerstein musical, The King and I. The role was King Mongkut of Siam, a character based on the real 19th century monarch. At first, the production was designed as a showcase for its female star, Gertrude Lawrence, who played Anna, the English governess brought to teach the king's children. Brynner, though cast in the male lead, was not expected to steal the spotlight. In those early performances, audiences didn't know what to make of him. His strong, exotic look and commanding presence were unlike anything Broadway had seen before, but not everyone was impressed right away. Brynner himself later recalled that one night, a frustrated spectator even hurled a shoe at him from the audience. While it stung at the time, the moment became a story he told with humor in later years, joking that it was a perfectly good shoe. One of the most important decisions Brynner made for the role came even before the show officially opened. The real King Mongkut was often depicted with a shaved head, and Brynner believed he could embody the character more convincingly by copying the look. Despite being proud of his thick, dark hair, which he often boasted was so dense he never needed a wig in his circus days, he boldly shaved it all off. It was a gamble, but it worked. The look gave him an edge and made him instantly recognizable. He kept his head shaved for the rest of his career, and what began as a theatrical choice became his lifelong trademark. On stage, Brynner was magnetic. He carried himself with authority, standing tall and moving with the confidence of a ruler. His piercing stare and deep voice added to the sense of power, while his chemistry with Gertrude Lawrence gave the production warmth and tension. Audiences began to see him not just as part of the show, but as its heart. Then in 1952, tragedy struck when Gertrude Lawrence suddenly collapsed backstage and died only weeks later. Her loss shocked the theater world, but it also changed the path of The King and I. Brynner, who had always been in her shadow in terms of billing, was now the undisputed star of the production. His name moved to the top, and his performance became the driving force that kept the show alive. In 1956, Brynner was invited to reprise the role for the film adaptation. His performance on screen was just as powerful as on stage, and it earned him the Academy Award for Best Actor. It was his first major film role, and to win an Oscar for it was extraordinary. From that moment on, he was tied forever to the role of King Mongkut. He went on to perform it more than 4,000 times over the course of his career, on Broadway, on tours, and in revivals. The King made Yul Brynner a legend, but Hollywood was ready to test him in entirely new ways: affairs, relationships, and secrets. While Yul Brynner built his career around an image of strength and authority, his personal life was far more complicated. Behind the curtain, he was a man of intense passion, restless desires, and carefully guarded secrets. His relationships were often the subject of speculation, and while some were public, many were kept hidden to protect his reputation in an era when Hollywood was less forgiving of private truths. Brynner's love life was filled with both marriages and fleeting affairs. He had a magnetic charm that drew women toward him, and his fame only made him more irresistible. Among his many romantic links were some of the most famous actresses of the time. He was rumored to have affairs with Marlene Dietrich, Judy Garland, and Joan Crawford, three women who themselves were larger-than-life figures in Hollywood. These relationships added to his reputation as a man who lived boldly and surrounded himself with glamour. Yet, despite his many romances, Brynner's first marriage was presented as stable and traditional. In 1944, he married actress Virginia Gilmore. Together, they had a son, Yul Rocky Brynner Jr. To the public, this marriage gave the impression of a grounded family life, which fit the image of a rising actor making his way in the United States. For several years, the media portrayed them as a happy couple, and this image worked in Brynner's favor as he built his career. However, like many Hollywood marriages, it was not as simple as it appeared. What remained hidden from the public eye during those years was Brynner's In private, he was involved in relationships with men, though he never admitted this openly. One of his most significant connections was with actor Herb Hatfield, best known for his role in The Picture of Dorian Gray. The two were close, and their relationship was described as passionate. Hatfield was not the only man linked to Brynner. but their bond was one of the most notable. Brynner was also part of the artistic circles that thrived in New York, and it was during this time that he posed nude for George Platt Lynes, a photographer celebrated for his bold and often provocative work. These full frontal portraits, while daring, were consistent with the private side of Brynner that sought out artistic and sensual experiences away from the public eye. In addition, there were rumors of his liaisons with Jean Cocteau, the French poet, playwright, and filmmaker known for his influence on modern art and literature. Cocteau's world was filled with experimentation and boundary pushing, and Brynner's presence in it reflected his willingness to embrace life beyond conventional expectations. Despite these connections, Brynner never acknowledged his publicly. Hollywood in the mid-20th century was still deeply conservative when it came to and an open admission could have destroyed his career. Instead, the press presented him as a romantic figure always surrounded by women, while his relationships with men remained unspoken, known only in private circles. This hidden side of Brynner added layers to his already complex personality, and while he lived boldly in many ways, he also knew the power of secrecy. And soon, his battles with fame and ego would bring him into sharp conflict with some of Hollywood's biggest stars. Rivalries in Hollywood. As Yul Brynner's fame grew, so did stories about his difficult personality. He was admired for his talent, but many who worked with him also remembered his sharp temper, controlling behavior, and constant need to assert himself. These qualities created lasting tensions with some of Hollywood's biggest stars, and gave him a reputation for being as demanding off-screen as he was commanding on-screen. One of his most talked-about conflicts was with Ingrid Bergman during the filming of Anastasia in 1956. Bergman, who had already achieved international recognition, was cast opposite Brynner in the dramatic story of a woman claiming to be the lost Russian princess. From the very beginning, the two clashed. Bergman was taller than Brynner, and she suggested using props or camera tricks to soften the height difference. Brynner refused. He would not allow himself to appear weak or diminished next to her. His response was cutting. "I am not going to play this on a box. I'm going to show the world what a big horse you are." The remark left Bergman shocked, and their working relationship was strained from then on. Despite the tension, both delivered strong performances, and Bergman won the Academy Award for Best Actress that year. If his conflict with Bergman was harsh, his rivalry with Steve McQueen on the set of The Magnificent Seven became legendary. Brynner was already a star by the time the film began shooting in 1960, while McQueen was still an up-and-coming actor. From the start, Brynner feared being overshadowed by McQueen's natural charisma. To maintain dominance, Brynner resorted to odd tactics. For example, he would often stand on small mounds of earth during scenes to make himself appear taller than McQueen. In retaliation, McQueen would quietly kick the dirt piles away when Brynner wasn't looking. McQueen also found subtle ways to draw attention during their scenes together. While Brynner delivered lines, McQueen might adjust his hat or fiddle with his gun, small movements that caught the audience's eye and pulled focus away from the lead actor. Brynner became so paranoid about being upstaged that he even hired an assistant to count the number of times McQueen touched his hat while he was speaking. Their tension was obvious on set, and McQueen later admitted openly, "We didn't get along." Away from his rivalries, Brynner also gained attention for his eccentric and often extravagant demands. His film contracts included specific requirements about everything from the color of the carpet in his trailer to the exact type of tissues and bottled water he expected. He even demanded that his breakfast eggs and wine be prepared to his liking. During one film, he insisted a private helicopter landing pad be built so he could fly ashore each day after shooting. He also made it clear that he should never be photographed with other bald actors, wanting his iconic look to remain unique. These behaviors built a reputation that was hard to ignore. Many actors saw him as egotistical and harsh, and crew members often described him as controlling. Among Frank Sinatra's circle, he earned the unflattering nickname Uncle Scrooge because of his stingy habits, despite his enormous wealth. He was, in short, a man who demanded much and gave little when it came to compromise. Health struggles and death. For much of his life, Yul Brynner carried himself as though he were indestructible. He projected strength on stage and screen, and his physical presence was part of what made him a star. But behind that image, a long and destructive habit had been silently shaping his future. Brynner began smoking at just 12 years old. What started as a boyhood experiment grew into a serious addiction. By adulthood, he was smoking as many as 5 packs of cigarettes a day. He often had one in hand during rehearsals, breaks, and even in casual photographs. For decades, he seemed unaffected, but the damage was building. In 1983, Brynner received the news that would change everything. He was diagnosed with lung cancer. That same year, he married his 4th wife, Kathy Lee, a ballerina almost 30 years his junior. The marriage brought him companionship during a difficult period, but his diagnosis forced him to face his mortality. Instead of hiding from the truth, Brynner confronted it directly. He adopted elements of Buddhism, which gave him a way to reflect on life, death, and the importance of acceptance. Friends and colleagues noticed a shift in him during this period. Though still proud and commanding, he had also become deeply thoughtful. Even as his health declined, Brynner remained active in the theater. He continued performing in The King and I, determined to keep working despite the pain and fatigue caused by his illness. His dedication impressed those around him, but his body was weakening. He also began to think about what he could leave behind, not just as an actor, but as a man who had made mistakes. Smoking had been his greatest weakness, and he wanted others to avoid the same fate. In his final months, Brynner decided to record a message for the public. It was filmed as an anti-smoking public service announcement and released after his death. In the video, Brynner speaks directly to the audience, urging them never to start smoking. His words were simple but powerful, made even more striking because they came from a man whose voice had always carried authority. Seeing him weakened but still commanding, audiences felt the weight of his warning. The PSA became one of the most memorable anti-smoking campaigns of its time. On October 10, 1985, Yul Brynner died in New York City at the age of 65. His passing was mourned around the world. Fans remembered him not only as King Mongkut or the gunslinger, but also as a figure of charisma and discipline whose presence had been unforgettable. Brynner had spoken often about how he wanted to be remembered. He joked about witty epitaphs he hoped would appear on his grave, such as, "Here lies a man who adored children, animals, and women, and whose heart was bigger than his head." In the end, however, his grave in France was marked with only his name and the dates of his birth and death. It was a simple memorial for a man whose life had been anything but simple. What his daughter finally revealed. For much of his life, Yul Brynner was not just an actor, he was also the author of his own legend. He told stories about himself that blurred the line between fact and fiction, and many people were left unsure of what to believe. Only later, through the words of his daughter Victoria, did the world finally get a clearer picture of who he really was. Victoria Brynner was born in 1962 to Yul and his second wife, the Chilean model Doris Kleiner. From the very beginning, her life was touched by fame. Audrey Hepburn, one of Yul's closest friends, was chosen as her godmother. Growing up, Victoria lived in the shadow of her father's enormous presence, both on stage and off. But unlike the public, she also saw the man behind the performance. In later years, she shared details about his life that confirmed long-standing rumors and corrected some of the myths he himself had spread. One of the most important clarifications she made was about his birth date. For years, Yul had claimed to be born in 1915 or even earlier, often to give himself a sense of greater worldliness or to fit whatever story he was telling. Victoria confirmed the truth. He was born on July 11, 1920, in Vladivostok, Russia. This simple fact cut through decades of speculation and reminded people that Brynner's habit of reinventing himself was not just for roles, it was how he lived his life. She also confirmed something more personal, her father's lasting bitterness toward his own father, Boris, who had abandoned the family when Yul was a child. That early wound never healed, and it shaped Brynner's relationships throughout his life. His need to control, his fierce independence, and even his constant myth-making could all be traced back, in part, to that painful beginning. Victoria spoke openly about her father's fondness for exaggeration. He loved to tell stories about his supposed adventures, some of which were completely untrue. For example, he once claimed that he had fought in the Spanish Civil War. This was false, but he repeated the story enough that many believed it. To Yul, these fabrications were not lies, but part of the larger role he was playing, the role of Yul Brynner, the mysterious star. What Victoria made clear was the dual nature of her father. He was brilliant, magnetic, and deeply talented, but he was also complicated. He created myths about himself, hid parts of his identity such as his and lived with an ego that often strained relationships. Yet behind the secrecy and bravado, there was also a man who cared for his children, pursued intellectual passions, and left behind a remarkable body of work. In the end, Victoria confirmed what many had long suspected. Yul Brynner's life was a mixture of truth and performance. The king was never just acting on stage. He carried that performance into every corner of his existence. He lived in stories, both real and invented, and that was how he wanted the world to see him. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss more fascinating stories from Hollywood history.